performance, which is very aligned with our last session on AI and people analytics. Our presenters for this presentation, we actually have a couple of presenters, are Sue Marcus. Sue is the regional president of Randstad Sourceright, which encompasses the firm's managed service provider and recruitment process outsourcing operations. In the last few years, Sue has driven Randstad Sourceright towards an even more consultative advisory culture. The MSP and RPO operations were brought together in 2019 under Sue's leadership, and the approach has catapulted her team's ability to help clients align strategy and decisions to attract talent. So welcome Sue as our first presenter. She will be speaking along with Mark Berkowsky, who's the Senior Director of Recruiting and Onboarding for Equitable. Mark has been in the talent acquisition space for over 20 years, and he has led recruiting functions at organizations including Prudential Financial, the New York Public Library, and Hewitt Associates. Mark is passionate about introducing technology into the recruiting process to improve the experience for both candidates and hiring managers. And he has led the introduction of AI into the candidate selection process to mitigate bias, allow for recruiting at scale, and to ensure that every candidate has a chance to interact with Equitable and put their best foot forward. Again, a session that is very much aligned with our last presentation by Shreyoshi. The session is on using meaningful data to manage and improve your talent program performance. I'll leave you here with our speakers, Sue Marcus and Mark Berkowsky.
Great, thank you, Tanisha. It's nice to be here with all of you today. I appreciate the opportunity. We are, as Tanisha mentioned, we really want to spend some time diving in how we're using data as it relates to some of really the hottest talent acquisition trends that we are all probably dealing with today in our own organizations. So certainly, while it's a conversation around data and analytics, it's also around really how we're using that to support key initiatives in our workforce. And when we think about that, we think about creating an agile workforce, making sure we're attracting the right people to our organizations, and understanding what these candidates and our employees really want from our organizations. It's looking within that, our ability to succession plan within our companies, and also kind of our new world and new way of working without geographic limitations. How can data help us to support that? And certainly probably near and dear to a lot of our hearts is how do we continue to support building diversity in the workforce. So those are really the topics that we're going to cover during this session. We have a poll that we wanted before we dive in. And Tanisha, are you able to help me with the poll?
There you go. Bill is launching the poll right now. So go ahead and answer. And we'll launch the results in a few seconds there, Sue.
Perfect. So certainly, as we have all been dealing kind of with a very agile world over the last several months, that is one of the topics that we were curious as to how your organization is feeling. Are you really adapting your talent strategies to be more focused on agility than you have in the past? So we'd love your feedback about that. And as you're completing that survey, as we think about some of the areas that we've that I consider as we think about the agility that we're all dealing with in the workforce, it's certainly, you know, the impact of the last year and a half with the pandemic in many areas of how we've managed that. It's also the type of worker and who can get the work done. So not surprising. Looks like most of you are addressing that and addressing the agility that is required in the workforce, and a little bit higher. So we have done a talent, Randstad Sourceright does a talent trends report where we survey 880 C-suite talent acquisition leaders on a quarterly basis and about key workforce trends and what we found about workforce agility and how organizations are bringing more agility into their strategies. The results we had was 77%, so right on track with this group here today. So that said, so Mark, if you could share with us a little bit about how you're dealing with workforce planning, and how that's changed in the wake of the pandemic, and how Equitable has made that drive to become a little more agile?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for inviting me. Thrilled to be here. Love talking about recruiting and data, though I was thinking about how do we shift this conversation back to AI? Because as I was like listening to the previous conversation, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is really cool stuff, but we won't go there. So workforce planning for us, our objectives as an organization haven't changed, right? Our focus is helping our clients to live long, fulfilling lives. How do we meet them where they are? So as an organization, our objectives haven't changed, but how we go about achieving those objectives through people, those are changing dramatically. So our workforce planning now is quicker, right? So we have been in this business for way longer than I'll admit out loud. And workforce planning used to be, let's look at 2 years, let's look at 3 years, let's think about our workforce 3 years out. Now we try and think about it in terms of months. We don't think about it in terms of years. So we're trying to look at our business and say, where are we growing it? Where are we maintaining it? And then from that perspective, then we layer our talent acquisition strategy on top of it. So as a business, we're clear as to what we want to accomplish, but that landscape from a talent perspective has kind of undergone a tectonic shift, right? In terms of what everybody in our space is dealing with. So the pandemic has made us really think about where the talent is. How do we attract that talent? Talent is more mobile. So how do we factor all of those things into our talent acquisition strategy to make sure we are an organization that people look at as an employer of choice?
Yeah, I think it is interesting, Mark, to the concept of being the employer of choice, but also the reality of how timely data is required to really support the business initiatives.
Mhm.
And I know you and I had talked in the past about, certainly trends are critically important and can help predict what the future holds, but things are changing so rapidly right now, that real-time data really is what we're all after to help us manage our workforce as well. How are you using some of that real-time data in your workforce planning?
So I think one of the things, and we're all, again, in the talent acquisition space, we're all looking at how do we diversify our workforces. And so one of the things, and I, because I'm a little embarrassed to say this, one of the things that we're doing with real-time data now is where we've shifted our focus to, okay, we filled this job, what went well and what didn't go well. So it tended to be a bit of a post-mortem on our process. Did we achieve all the objectives that we wanted to achieve? I was in a meeting a while back with one of our finance leaders who said to us, why don't we do that in the moment? Why don't we actually, instead of waiting until there's nothing we can do to affect the course of our actions here, let's take a look real time at the data that's coming out of our applicant tracking system. Let's look at the candidate flows for these requisitions and change direction in the moment. So if I can sort of go into recruiting nerd moment for a minute, we use Taleo, and Taleo has a report that's candidate EEO summary by recruiting status. So we now look at that report for all of our requisitions on a weekly basis to say, are we getting the kind of candidate flow, the diverse candidate flow for all of our requisitions so we can affect change along the way? And that real-time data has made a real difference. And we can have those really qualitative conversations with our hiring managers to say, let's take a pause, let's take a step back, this is working, this isn't, and then we can redirect or reshift. So that's been really helpful, just as one example.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And I think that real-time view in the midst of the recruiting process versus after is a really positive shift to help make a change in the results on a go forward basis.
Yeah, I was really annoyed that I didn't think of that sooner, that our
I'm sure there's many initiatives that you brought to the table. As you're thinking about the recruiting, Mark, and you're thinking about, that virtual world that we've talked a little bit about, market intelligence is, certainly looking at our ATS data and our internal company data is one part of that. Looking externally is another part of that. How are you using market intelligence to guide your path?
So again, I think we're probably all in talent acquisition space doing this now. Where is the talent? So first and foremost, where does the talent sit? Because in the past, we were a little bit tethered to geography,
Mm-hmm.
where, okay, I have an office in New York and I have an office in Charlotte. And so the focus on my talent pool is tied to those geographical areas. One of the things that coming out of the pandemic, I think we've all realized is we're all much better at working virtually than we thought, and we can deliver at a high level. So organizations are now saying talent, and you said it in the beginning, talent is everywhere. So we're using real-time data to say, okay, where is the talent? What's the compensation in those markets? Who's the competition in those markets? And so we plan a strategy around how do we attract the talent that now can work anywhere. The other piece where we're using sort of real-time market intelligence is what are the adjoining skill sets or professions or jobs that we hadn't thought about, but the skills are readily transferable. So that market data expands our talent pool. So along with the expansion of geography, by looking at broader skill sets that are very much aligned to what we're already looking for, it opens up a whole new world. And the tools that we're using from a real-time data analytics perspective are telling us this skill relates to this skill. And you can draw a diagram that says, here are the people that you should be talking to that are sort of in those concentric circles that can do this job that maybe nobody's talking to them about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do very similar research where we can look and see even the past titles of people who've moved into a current role. So maybe not traditional past, but you start really digging into how have people moved into their current roles, what was their career path, and you can start to peel back the onion a little bit and open up your view as to who might be able to fill those types of roles.
Yeah, we don't have a choice, right? In the talent acquisition space, the number of people is shrinking, right? Our baby boomers are leaving. We don't have as many people coming in behind them. So if we don't get creative, I mean, our job is hard enough. If we don't get creative in who we're talking to, looking at skills that we can leverage across different roles and professions, we're going to find ourselves in a really tough spot finding enough qualified people to do the jobs that we need to have done.
Yeah. And, one of the topics that we, certainly didn't have as one of the agenda items on our discussion, but as we're talking about this, reskilling and the amount of effort that organizations are putting into building training paths for their own organization, but also for the talent in the market to be able to support some of their products. I mean, I think about the technology providers who are really putting a ton of effort into making sure that their tools people are trained on so that they can support their customer base, and also with a focus of supporting the underserved communities, which has been a really positive part of the reskilling story as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mark, I know a big focus of yours is succession planning. And while turnover at Equitable is relatively low, and you have, enjoyed a very positive retention within the organization, you're still really focused on succession planning. Tell us a little bit about how you take a use data to support that?
So I think it's similar in a lot of ways to what we've just been talking about. First of all, we need to know who's in the market. We need to know what they're doing. We need to know, again, what their organizations look like to see who in fact can be potential successors for those critical roles in our organization. We're also using data to say who might be ready for a move, because some of the tools out there now will tell us kind of in an organizational structure who can you look at who might be ready for that move, but that potential path isn't available to them in their current organization, because those are the folks that we want to start calling, building relationships with, having our business leaders reach out to, and start to do the preliminary work that allows you to move more quickly when that critical role opens, because you've got that candidate pool, you've had those conversations, and not with recruiting, but with our business leaders who, when they start having those conversations, people who they're talking to take that really seriously, right? So that work, who those people are, we get them to have those conversations, but those are the people then when the opportunity presents itself, we can move quickly to get those people in the pipeline to potentially fill those critical roles. And so rather than going out maybe and spending what, $150,000, $200,000 on a retained search, you've got some folks lined up. So the investment in that analytics, that data and analytics technology pays off pretty quickly if you can use that information instead of actually having to pay a retained search fee.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love the fact that you talk about the business being involved in that proactive approach to talent acquisition, and that it is really not just a recruiting team's responsibility, it is the whole organization's responsibility, and to have the buy-in from the senior leadership to really channel that proactive approach is fantastic.
Yeah, one of my favorite conversations to have with business leaders is, I found somebody for this job, we now have to go ahead and hire them. I'm like, okay.
How do we figure that out? But that's a good problem to have, for sure.
It's a really good problem to have.
Yeah. Just to share with you a little bit what we've seen in the market too with the market intelligence is we've seen certainly in this market, there's been a real significant surge in sales, service, and organizations creating those call centers, if you will, on a virtual level. And the market intelligence has been really fantastic to help understand where that supply demand supports where to go recruit from, but also, opportunities in the market where, wage issues or opportunities to support an organization's growth in this area. It's really helped to pinpoint where to recruit within this virtual kind of no geographic limit.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's go to, so as we're all recruiting and we're kind of digging in and succession planning and looking at where this talent is, the skills that we need, certainly understanding what people want is important. And through our research, we found that most organizations believe that their employees are expecting more of them. And I think certainly through the pandemic, we saw a lot of, we saw the role of HR really become very significant in taking care of the workforce, really stepping up to help manage how work was changing and how work was getting done. But also it's a very competitive market right now. So being really in tune with what your employees want and what talent wants is important. How are you handling that?
So I think the first thing that I think we all do is we ask them. So what is it that's important to you? And there's a lot more of that going on now because we're all trying to sort out, are we going back to the office? Are we not going back to the office? How often are we going to go back to the office? Am I going to have a desk? Am I not going to have a desk? Am I
Yeah.
have a drawer for my shoes? I don't, right? So we're asking lots and lots and lots of questions about what do our employees want? And then we're also doing things, I think, on the employee side, based on those answers, we're trying to do things that as an organization we never did before. One example from Equitable is that during the pandemic, we engaged with an outside organization that provides tutoring. We know how hard it was, right, for parents to work and deal with the kids who are at home um, and help with homework. I mean, look, I have two kids, and the math they do resembles nothing like the math that I did when I was in school. So
Exactly.
forget about it. It's just, but
I don't even try.
so we engaged with TutorMe and we provided tutoring services for parents, which was a huge, I think, when even if people didn't take, and people did take advantage of it, but even the idea that we're thinking about that kind of service for our employees is, I think, really a nice way to say we care
Yeah.
about you, and not just you, but your families, and making your work-life balance manageable, given all of the upheaval and the struggles that we were having going through the pandemic. So I think little things like that made a huge difference for internal employees and retention. I think attraction is a little bit different. I mean, we can talk about those things, but I think attraction to me these days is people want to work for an organization that they can feel proud to talk about. And as an organization, Equitable front and center puts things out there that says we want to be a force for good in our communities. We are, I think, 6 years in a row recognized by the Great Place to Work Institute as an organization. Disability in, we've been recognized. So we put those things out there. We signed on to the CEO Action Plan for Diversity. So from an attraction perspective, we do those kinds of things to say, if you come to work for us, we put them front and center. They're all on our website. If you come to work for us, we have a set of business principles that should align, hopefully, with who you are. And then the work that we do in our communities, we have the Equitable Foundation that does amazing work. I'm sure other organizations can tell the same stories, but that's what we try and do. And we use the data to talk about why you'd want to come to work for us.
Yeah. Well, and we found that the data, even understanding some of, what you're speaking to as to what matters to candidates in the market today.
Mhm.
And there has been a lot of research done about the shifting wants of the worker, right? Of the workforce. There is a lot more focus certainly on that work-life balance as being a key focus of the workforce. I know you did very similar during, we've always done employee engagement surveys, and pre-pandemic, we did them quarterly, and it gave us really great information that we could look at trends. We started doing them weekly. We started doing skip levels and tracking some of that data and like anecdotal feedback coupled with the survey feedback. And once we saw the percentage of people responding to weekly surveys dwindle after, kind of that initial few months of the pandemic, we moved it to monthly. But that data that came back, and we could see how really the anxiety a little bit of the workforce had changed after the initial onset, and then people getting comfortable with how things were working. But that feedback and the trends of that feedback has been really helpful for us, and I know you do the same, to really spearhead and talk to our workforce about what we're hearing from them, what we're doing as a result of that, and how we really shape our retention strategy and engagement strategy.
And from a talent attraction perspective, even before the pandemic, we knew that there was more mobility. People were not staying in jobs for very long. And now I think my personal opinion is that mobility is going to increase. It's a whole lot easier today to interview, right, than it was a few years ago. And do you actually put on pants for your interview? Who knows, right? So it's I think those opportunities are going to be made more available. I think people are getting more things pushed to them through platforms like LinkedIn. And so we have to be really good at this attraction piece and the retention piece. And I think you're absolutely right. It's listening to what the data is telling us from the external market, but also talking to our employees and listening to what they need, because there's a broad array of things that we can do to make sure that work-life balance is there for them and that we're listening.
Yeah, it's interesting as you think about the attraction strategy. One of the other things that we do ourselves and we do for our customers is we look at how is your organization, or how is our organization perceived from a candidate's point of view. So we go out to the different boards, go out to whether it be a Glassdoor or just the Indeed reviews or our own website, or what's the chatter from a social media standpoint, because that'll tell you a lot as well, as to what candidates coming into your organization are seeing about you, as well as gives us that that additional data as to is there more beyond our surveys that we should be addressing, or we should be celebrating or highlighting because of what we see on those the outside view of our organization.
Right, and we survey all of our new hires about you, right? So we need to know that the experience that our new hires is having or are having through the recruitment and selection process is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Because that can kill you quick if that's not really done with exceptional quality and care. So that data we act on. Fortunately, we don't have to act on it very often, but that data is really important to us, and we ask every new hire about their experience through the process, their technology onboarding, all of those things, to make sure that when they go out and talk to their friends, we're going to talk to more of their friends, that the things that they're saying are really positive about the overall experience, and the data tells us that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that experience now more than ever is critical, as we're seeing really that strong jobs reports. May came back very strong, unemployment rates decreasing. The competition is so strong that we're seeing multiple offers coming in for job seekers, that making sure that it's a very engaging interview process, onboarding process is really critical, and staying really tight with that candidate through the point of start is important, just with how competitive the market is right now.
Yeah, and I keep wanting to come back to this, sorry. This is where AI plays, I think, a really important role, because we all know that the thing that we hear, the biggest complaint about talent acquisition is, I applied, I never heard anything. And so AI, in my view, is a very good way to address that, where you apply for a role with an organization and immediately you're having a chat about your experience, your skills, your interest, whatever the chat is set up to do. Everybody gets contacted. AI allows you to recruit at scale, which I think the previous speaker was exactly right. You got to go through your due diligence and make sure all those things are set up appropriately. But what a great way to enhance the candidate experience. I knew I was going to work that in somewhere. Sorry.
No doubt, no doubt. The technology and AI is going to be part of the discussion, but I agree with you 100%. And, we're even leveraging AI technology from the source and screening that lets us zero in very quickly on the qualified candidates. And then, follow up with candidates once positions have closed, or if they're not qualified, at least to your point, that they're hearing back and know next steps and where else that they may find opportunities within the organization.
And I quickly saw a glance down. There was a question about do we do surveys for candidates who aren't hired? We don't do that yet. I think part of it is a cost issue and capacity issue, but we do not at this point. We've debated it back and forth for a number of years, but we're not surveying those folks who didn't get hired.
Yeah, and I do think that is.
We have a question here. I'm not sure if you want to take it right now, Sue or Mark, but I think it might sort of feed into the discussion. Do you ask candidates that apply or that don't get the job about their candidate experience? She struggles with that one, and that's a question from Phyllis. So do you ask them or do you get that feedback on their candidate experience?
We don't get feedback on candidate experience for those people who aren't hired. I mean, part of it, I guess you have to kind of bifurcate your candidate pool to people who were interviewed and didn't get hired, people who applied, didn't get hired. So the short answer is no, we don't do that now. I think there's value in it, but we're not there just yet.
Great, thanks, Mark, and thanks for the question. So, Mark, let's turn a little bit to diversity. So I know that this has always been kind of a key initiative for you and the Equitable organization. And certainly within the last year and a half has been extremely forward facing in talent acquisition. And it's exciting to see organizations really make the investments and the focus across the board in their diversity and inclusion strategy. Tell us a bit about, this has been something you've been focused on well before the last year or so. Tell us a bit about why.
So I think the obvious answer, right, that we all know is an organization that has a diverse workforce is more successful, they're more profitable. We all know that. I think there are some things that come along with that, though, which if you're more successful and profitable, you can be more innovative. You're attracting better talent because you're more successful and more profitable. And it becomes, I don't want to say self-fulfilling prophecy, but it builds upon itself because you then are that employer of choice. I also think, though, that diversity is important because it makes your organization so much more attractive as a place to work. I know that I wouldn't want to work for an organization where everybody looked and sounded like me, right? That would be awful. So an organization that is diverse, we are more creative, it's more fun to come to work every day because we're learning. I get to hear about different perspectives, different experiences. It forces me, having a diverse workforce, forces me to think differently, gets me outside my own sort of blinders. And we then become that organization that people want to work for because they look at the data and they say, well, there are people there who look like me. And I feel psychologically safe because I'm not going to be the only person who is a person of color working in this particular team. So it is, there's so many different facets to this, but just my personal opinion, and this is what I've always believed, and this is why we started talking about diversity and diverse slates, I think back in 2016 with Randstad, is it just makes your organization so much, make coming to work every day more fun.
Yeah.
And it's you're learning and growing as a professional, because you're experiencing all of these different ideas and perspectives. And so you get the best talent, and that leads your organization to greater success. So I know it sounds a little funny, but I truly believe that makes people want to come to work for you, which is why we
So,
put our data on our website.
so Mark, if I could just share a little moment of what in the last 48 hours in our organization, one of our delivery managers, Celeste, who you may know, through one of our business resource groups, was introduced to Harvard has a program for Black youth to support their development. And it's a pretty competitive program. And her son was selected and made, I think through 5 cuts, made this group. So he will now have this program, year-long program, summer program. And it's a debate, learning to debate and having access to the professors at Harvard and actually time on campus. And it came through our business resource group that she was introduced to this, and her son had the opportunity. So yep. Exciting. We were all thrilled for her, but it makes it so fun that this yes. is kind of what comes out of the diverse, having that diverse organization. I would agree with you. It does make it much more fun to work together in a diverse environment. So tell me, so Mark, I know we're supposed to be talking data points and we're almost at time. How are you using the data? You said you posted on your site?
So if you look at our website, you will see all of we post our diversity data. It's right out there. So what's the percentage of our diverse workforce, gender, people of color. So we own those results, and we want people to know who we are as an organization. And we think that those results will then attract more diverse candidates to Equitable. And again, it becomes that sort of cycle where everybody wins. So using the data on our website and making it public, I think, is just one example of how we use data to drive diversity.
Great. Well, I know we are almost at time. So thank you, Mark, for sharing with us.
My pleasure. I don't know. I know there were some questions we didn't answer them along the way.
We actually had a question from Phyllis that we answered. If anyone else had a question, that would be a good time. We can give it time for one question from Sue, for Sue or Mark on their presentation on using data. Oh, there you go. Culture of recruitment with senior leaders when they are so busy, focused on their clients' deliverables, etc. So how do you build that culture with competing priorities?
So I think for us, and I think it's probably different from every organization, but our senior leadership recognizes how critical it is to be involved in that process. And they own it. Like they firmly believe that this is a driver of their success. So they step up and they want to be involved. So it is part of our culture. Sometimes we have to play catch up in recruiting because they're way ahead of us because they've already found these really strong people.
And Mark, I think you've created that culture, which I think is a fantastic culture. I will say I don't see that always replicated in the market. It's certainly the stronger performing talent acquisition teams where that is part of the culture. But I would say organizations where I've seen transform, you really need sponsorship from the top level executives. And we have worked with organizations where with that sponsorship, we've been able to really work with the leadership team to help them understand, bring their leaders and managers of their organizations into the recruiting process, help them see where that's valuable to be proactive, and also made it, somewhat of a competition to showcase recruiting results by lines of business. So leaders became accountable to their own results and making sure that their teams were performing well against peers in their organization. So I do think there's some active steps you can take if that isn't part of your culture today. So with that, we should probably say thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Sue and Mark, for a great presentation. And thank you to everyone that asked questions to Sue and Mark. If you want to connect with Randstad Sourceright, feel free to send us a quick chat, and Sue will drop her contact information so you can get more information on how to leverage data in your talent acquisition strategies.